Hi, everybody. Welcome to my podcast. I'm Gabrielle Clemens. Welcome to Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money. Today, I'm very excited. We have a very inspiring woman. She has been divorced for 10 years and just has developed her new chapter in her new life in just a really inspiring and aspirational way. I'd like to introduce you to Heather. Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, when I first met you, which we've known each other for, less than a year now, I've always been very impressed about how you look upon your divorce and your current life and what you've built going forward in this new chapter with, you don't have any bitterness. You don't seem to have any regrets or, concerns about, well, I would have, could have, should have, I wish someone had told me. And you appear anyway to be very at peace with where you are today. And you're truly what we call a woman of courage. It's not an easy process. Can you tell us a little bit about how long you were married, a little bit about your family? This is completely anonymous. We don't use your last name. And, we just want to be very respectful of your privacy. But tell us a little bit about your pre-divorce life, and then let's step into the divorce process so that we can help other people.
Sure. So pre-divorce life, I was married for 20 years, and I was married when I was 26 years old. So I was young. And we had 4 children within 5.5 years. So basically for 15 of those 20 years, our life was very chaotic and busy, and it was all about the kids' schedules and dividing and conquering. We both were very much about family and participating in as much as we both could with the children and family vacations, weekends, all of that together. And nothing really, struck out as going wrong or anything. I think it was just 20 years of a very, very busy family life.
Okay. So then the issue of divorce was introduced. And so how did you approach the beginning steps for yourself? So I think you mentioned your husband filed first. And so what were your next steps?
So he filed first. We had agreed to it. And through our therapy sessions, we finally came to the decision and the agreement that divorce was the best next step. And obviously somebody has to file first. And so we decided he would file, and we both had attorneys at that time already. The attorneys knew. I went to my attorney's office to be served, when he filed. And the next step was the two of us sat down with our 2 attorneys at a table, and we just kind of started talking about, what we were looking at in terms of assets, how we were each thinking about how to divide them, what we each wanted out of this in terms of that.
Okay. Now, how did you pick your attorney?
He had hired an attorney first. And so I had a friend from law school who was working in a firm in Boston, and I called him up and I said, this is who my husband has hired, and can you give me some recommendations for kind of a comparable or compatible attorney for myself, knowing who he's hired? And my friend gave me 3 names, and I went in and met with the first name on the list in Boston. We really clicked, and his associate was great. And so I just decided then and there I was going to go with him. It felt right. It felt like the right fit. And I never even called the other 2.
Wow. That's amazing. And you stuck with this attorney throughout your process?
Yep, I did.
Okay. So you really made the right choice the first time.
Yes. And I think one very important point about it that I think made it all work so well was my attorney and my husband's attorney both had worked many, many times together on divorce arrangements, both contentious, amicable, everything. So they were very comfortable working together.
Okay. That's important. And sometimes you don't always get that. So, that's great information. So now you mentioned a therapist. So in the first chapter of my book, I talk about the importance of building your team. So you had chosen your attorney. Tell me about your therapist. Was this a separate therapist?
Separate therapist. Well, it was a marriage counseling therapist.
Okay.
And so we went together every week, and kind of a couple of years before we decided to divorce, we started talking about something's not working, something's not going right. We started with the therapist, and I would say, I don't think I'm the best candidate for really getting into therapy. And I was probably the biggest problem in why it maybe wasn't working as well as it might for some other people, because I do think it's a very important component and a really important first step, because it makes you think about and try and talk about issues or areas of the marriage that you've kind of been ignoring or avoiding talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the best step for me, myself, in terms of the therapist was, once we decided that we were going to divorce, and he was instrumental in leading us to that point. I think he could see through the sessions this was going to be better if we, chose to divorce than really kept trying and dragging it out. So once we decided we were going to get divorced, we both looked at him and said, we have 4 children. I had 2 in high school and 2 in middle school at the time. Not great ages for them to have their parents get divorced. And so we said, now we need help. How do we do this for the kids? And so we spent, I don't remember how long, at least another year, meeting with him every week to kind of discuss what's the best way to handle the kids. How do we approach them? How do we answer their questions? How do we treat each other in front of the kids, which I think is very, very important, especially in more contentious divorce situations. So that's where he was very instrumental for us.
Okay. Did you ever have your own therapist outside of the family dynamic with your husband and helping you through? Did you ever have your own separate therapist, just independent of this process? Okay.
I did for about a year, and so did my husband. We both had our individual and then the joint therapist. It's very time consuming, I must say. And I think for my individual therapist, you might appreciate this, Gabrielle. She was Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackburn?
Yeah, Blackburn, I think.
Blackburn.
Wow.
She was his daughter.
Wow.
And so I think I was more interested in I kept wanting to talk about her life and growing up as his daughter and all of this, and which of course she just shuts me down right away. But so that was one issue, but.
Interesting. And is that why you chose her, perhaps, is because she was so interesting?
I didn't know at the time.
Okay.
When I first, so we started with her together as a couple.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And she then looked at us one day and said, I think you two need to separate, and I think I should keep meeting with Heather, and you, Joe, I've got a couple names you should start meeting with. And then because she was going to start meeting with me individually, we had to go find another kind of marriage counselor therapist.
Okay. All right. And your ex found his own own
His
therapist
own. Yes.
as well. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So you have your attorney, you have your therapist, you have your family therapist, which I think is a great additional component. I don't hear,
Yes.
I mean, it sounds as though your divorce was amicable enough that you could be in the same room thinking about how do we work through this process so that our children are still, are not
Right.
dragged into it and don't have a negative connotation of the whole thing. Okay. So those two legs of the stool are taken care of. And now what about your financial advisor? Did you have a separate financial advisor to help you through this process?
Yes. After listening to you talk about the therapist, if I can add one thing about that is because both of us, over the course of 10 years, having other friends going through divorce, they're friends with family members going through divorce. The biggest question the two of us get all the time is, how did you do it so well? Your kids have always been in a great place. You two have always gotten along. We do family celebrations events. We've always done them together with the kids. And so my biggest advice to anybody going through this is, work together. You always have to work together for the best interest of the kids, even if it's not, you don't think it's in your best interest. And it makes a huge, huge difference on how your kids get through this.
Okay. That's great. That's great advice. I'm going to come back to that. But let's get back to your financial advisor. We're building the team. Did you have a financial advisor on your team?
I did. And so because married for 20 years, I hadn't worked in 18 of those 20 years. And so I was actually pretty disconnected with our financial situation. And, it was the traditional divide and conquer, raising the family. And so once we started, the scariest form to fill out is that initial financial form where they're asking you how much you spend a week on hair appointments, gym memberships, all of that. And so once I started filling all of that out and talking to my attorney and quickly realized, his job is to make sure the assets are divided equally and the way they're supposed to be. His job is not to determine who gets which specific assets in the mix. For him, if they're divided properly and we're both happy with it, that's great. But I quickly realized I need someone to help me decide how to prioritize what I needed for my life going forward. And especially having not worked in so long, I didn't really have a credit rating at the time. And so fortunately, one of my very good friends from law school, whom I worked together with at a wealth management firm in Wellesley before I had children, he was still working there. He actually is still working there to this day. I have a meeting with him on Monday. And I called him up and I said, I think I need some guidance. And he was fantastic. Every, draft settlement agreement we kept coming up with, I would immediately send it to him. He would go through it. He would come back to me and say, you need more cash up front because you don't really have a credit rating. It's going to be harder for you to get a mortgage. It's going to be harder for you to do this or that. And so he was all about, I need cash up front and what things I should be willing to trade off for that and what I should not trade for that.
Perfect. And that is the role of a certified divorce financial analyst or CPA or any financial professional. Doesn't have to be a CDFA. If he wasn't, it doesn't even matter. He was a trusted financial advisor to you and helped you sort through, which is exactly what the role should be. And it sounds like he did a great job for you.
Yeah.
So
he did.
Yeah.
And to this day, like I said, I'm meeting with him Monday. He still is advising me, he's looking at your alimony is ending in X number of years.
Yeah.
So he's the one looking forward and thinking about planning for when my alimony ends and what do I need to do and what do I need to think about.
Now, did he also help you with insurance? Life insurance, if you had to have it, or if your ex had to have it, did he introduce any of those components of your agreement?
So he was involved in every part of it, but
Okay.
I did not have any insurance issues. I did not need to get life insurance. That my ex-husband did. But my advisor wasn't involved in that.
Okay. All right. So that was maybe a separate person.
Right.
So, okay. So you have your attorney, you had your financial professional, you had your multiple therapists, you had three people involved at this point. And now you mentioned you just sat down and you had the attorneys and you and your ex worked it out. Was there any litigation? I mean, what process? It doesn't sound as though it was mediation or arbitration or litigation. You just sat around a coffee table or a conference table and hammered out an agreement?
Yeah, we did. And I think both attorneys realized pretty quickly that this was going to be a relatively amicable situation, that we were both, just let's make it fair. My ex-husband, he is a very honest, fair person. And so I didn't have any kind of fears or anything. That he understands the financials better than I do. He understands his business better than I do. I wasn't worried about fairness, being an issue. So I think both attorneys kind of saw this is a situation we can do it quickly. We can get it done and just sit down at a conference table and work it out. And I think we probably met, the four of us, four, maybe 5 times together.
Wow.
And I think we had 2 draft agreements before we came to the final settlement.
Okay. So that's very unusual. The fact that it was so amicable. I mean, I'm sure you have friends who've been through the process that it's been a very different.
Nightmare.
Absolute nightmare. So what made it so agreeable? I mean, you weren't concerned that he was hiding money or, wasn't really. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I think we both, he was just, like I said, and to this day, he's a very honest guy. And he's very fair to me still. But we just sat down with the bank accounts, the investments accounts, the retirement accounts, his business investments. And, we just laid it out all on the table, and how are we going to divide it up?
Wow. That's amazing. So since then, since your divorce, so over the last 10 years, have you had any wranglings with him around legal issues or financial issues? Anything that you need to follow up on?
No, nothing specific. I think one of the more stressful parts in the beginning, the early years of the divorce, was I felt completely overwhelmed because the decision, part of the agreement was we would split education expenses for the kids 50-50.
Okay.
And that to me was like, I had like a tight chest of how am I going to do that for kids, all of that. And that was definitely stressful. And I really had to think about planning, right after the divorce was final, our oldest went to college. The next one was going to college the next year. The other 2 were in private schools. So there were a lot of education expenses happening and coming up. So then when I say he was very fair and still is, eventually his business, took a turn for the better for him. And being a very fair person, he, took over all of the education expenses after that point.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a good guy.
It's a very good guy. And without ever having to go back to the attorney or, saying, hey, your situation's changed. I shouldn't still be doing this. It was just all done without any attorneys.
Now, you mentioned that you felt tight-chested with all these obligations, but had you involved your financial advisor through that process, saying, I'm going to be responsible for college, work that into the numbers, do the projections. These are okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
He knew every step of the way. It was more me kind of, after 20 years of marriage and not really having to think about, how are we going to pay for college? How are we going to do that? And I guess that would be one piece of advice, that I would give, not anyone just going through divorce, anyone in a marriage is, I was the one at home raising the kids, and that is what I wanted to do. I was so happy doing it. I wouldn't change it for the world. What I would change is I would have been more involved in understanding our financial situation throughout the marriage, rather than not paying much attention because we had a great life, everything was fine, and then having to kind of catch up and understand it all as we're going through the divorce.
Right. And that's a common theme that as people do look back, particularly women look back at their marriages, and there is a divide and conquer traditional division of responsibilities in a marriage. It's common. I think women now, younger women, I think they will stay a little bit more involved. It's what I can say for the next generation. But that's great advice and absolutely important. Tell me about healthcare. Did you, because healthcare is such a big issue right now, was he able to keep you on his healthcare policy? Did you just have to get private healthcare, or how did that work out for you?
So I am still to this day on his healthcare policy.
Okay. I'm telling you, good guy. That's lucky you.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I don't know how that will change, when and if he retires, but for now I am still on his policy.
Okay. Well, good. You're very far away from Medicare age, but typically at 65, then you will be able to get on Medicare. And that's what a lot of people just tie the healthcare to Medicare age, and then you go from there. But that's good. It sounds like that's worked out well for you.
Yeah.
So as you're looking back on this whole process, and it sounds like it was a very amicable process, you haven't had to go back for contempts or modifications, and not everybody has that. But what would you advise people going forward, besides just getting staying involved in the financial aspects of their marriage, and so that you can carry through the divorce or protect yourself? What would you advise people? Do you have any things you do differently, or I don't like to call it regrets, because you seem very, very at peace and comfortable and happy with the way things have worked out. More importantly, how your children have thrived, regardless of this little blip that happened. Because it certainly your divorce doesn't define you, and it doesn't define anyone. You have to move on from it, and that's why planning, particularly financial planning, is so critical. But looking back to someone, who's going through this right now, maybe listening to this podcast, feeling like, wow, we're never going to be such an amicable, happy divorce couple. What would you recommend to them, or what advice do you have to them, and what would you change, if anything, about your process?
So I think the biggest thing I would change is, because of the age of our children 10 years ago, and I think we both kind of knew, this is going flat. It's not really working. But I was the one who was really determined to keep the marriage going, or to try and keep the marriage going, because I thought the kids aren't at the right age. We should just keep it going, make it work until they're older. At least all of them are in college. And so my ex-husband, he was the one that kind of put his hand up at one point and said, I can't keep doing it. And so I'm grateful that he did. And I'm grateful that the therapist kind of jumped on that and said, okay, let's start talking next steps, because I very much would have kept going. And that, in hindsight, that would have been a mistake. I look at what my life has been like. Once obviously it's an incredibly stressful, emotional year. Well, for us, it was a year from separation to the divorce being final.
Wow.
And so, it's an upheaval in your life, in your children's lives. There's no way of getting around that. But looking back, I think after that first year, and I look at what my life was like and where I have gone from there and what my life has become, and I realized had we followed the way I wanted to, we would have both been kind of just chugging along for maybe 3, 4, 5 more years. And we both would have missed the opportunity to kind of start to turn our lives into what they are now.
Wow. That's really great advice. And so you're glad. So that's not even a regret. You're glad that it didn't go the way you wanted to.
Right. Yes. And I guess my regret is that I kept trying to keep it going.
Yes. Well, that's what we do as mothers, right? And as wives.
It is.
We do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We think, and how are the kids? So you said they're fabulous. And,
oh my gosh, they're great.
That's amazing.
Obviously having your parents go through a divorce, it's not all rosy and great the whole time. And I think that is where one of the other biggest pieces of advice I have is use a therapist to guide you through how to handle your children, how to talk to them. More importantly, how to talk about each other to your children. I see many of my friends make mistakes along the way with that, especially when it's a more sudden, contentious situation. And I think the therapist is so instrumental in kind of getting you to realize you don't say those things to your children, or you don't say those things to each other in front of them. You still need to be a united front for your kids.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fabulous. So here you are 10 years out. Tell us about your life. Tell us about your, wonderful, your day to day. What do you do? And sort of what does your life look like now, 10 years post-divorce?
Yeah. So, I continued kind of just being the mom, raising her kids until my youngest graduated from high school. And when he went off to college, I had, the same empty nester kind of, oh no, what am I going to do? As even, married couples or married women, men go through. And so, as you know, I went to law school and I thought, maybe I'll go back to school. So I went back to school and I got my LLM in tax. And I did that part-time. So that was about 2.5 years. And then once I graduated from that program, then it's another, what am I going to do? So that's how I met you, Gabrielle, right? I decided through a mutual friend of ours, we were both encouraged to apply to teach business law at Babson. And my family has a lot of ties to Babson. And I thought, bingo, this could be the great, thing for me. And it has been, as you know. So for the past six months, almost 6 months, I've been teaching business law at Babson, and it is something I never expected. I never thought I would do. And I think, looking forward in my life, I think it's going to be one of the greatest things that I did do.
Yeah. I agree. And you're so good at it. I mean,
thank you. As are you.
Oh my gosh, Heather, you're such an inspirational professor, and you bring so much joy and energy to the classroom. I mean, I can just tell. And every announcement out to your students is like, "Hey, great job, good job, doing awesome. Thanks for your energy today." But it certainly brings me a lot of joy to be teaching as well, and it gets you out of your head and gets you into
absolutely
the younger generation, especially as we're all empty nesters now.
Right.
But no, so that's great. So you've built up quite a life for yourself that, you're not looking back. You're not looking at everything that your ex is doing. You've moved on. You've been open to opportunities, taking chances, getting out of your comfort zone. right? And allowing yourself to have a full and complete life. And that's what we want all of our divorce listeners to know, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a next chapter. Keep your options open and your eyes and ears open, right, Heather? Because
absolutely,
when our mutual friend first invited us to do this, get on this journey of being a professor when we hadn't been, it was a leap of faith, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked about, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes that light is brighter than you ever expected.
Oh, that's great. That's so you. That's so inspirational. Yeah. It is true. But you have to be open to it. You have to take chances.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not easy. And for a lot of people who are recovering from the divorce process, that you have to get up and you did the LLM program, you took that, and then you said, well, we'll see what happens then. And then you take little baby steps, and all of a sudden you look back and you have this brand new, bright, shiny new life that really is fulfilling. So,
and he does too. That, we both have these great new lives that I think I say to my kids all the time, like, do you agree that we are both happier in our lives separately than we probably would have been together?
And what do they say?
And they do agree. They agree. I don't think they would have agreed, when they were still in high school, but now as young adults, they definitely agree.
Excellent. Oh, so that's a win-win-win. I call that a win-win-win. You, your ex, and your kids. This is all winning. So, all right. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And, I'm just trying to show people going through the divorce that there are happy outcomes, and, life does get better and very fulfilling. So, all right, Heather, thank you. I will see you on campus.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money podcast with Gabrielle Clemens. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, or to get a copy of Gabrielle's book, Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money, head over to www.gabrielleclemens.com. And don't forget to check out the show notes for additional contact information.